All right, so welcome everybody. Excited to have another great conversation today, hosted by Practicare. My name is Ayan Shahed. I'm the general manager for Practicare, and we've also got Kelly Pritchard, and she's an instructional designer and content specialist with Practicare. We're a online provider of digital training solutions for the community-based care and for healthcare. And we've got close to 100 courses now spanning various dimensions of care, whether it's thinking about seniors, children and youth, adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we're really excited to kind of bring modern learning methodologies and really progressive content to that space that's reflective of standards across Canada. This summer, we're hosting a series of conversations to talk about different dimensions of care and different things happening in the space. A couple of months ago, we had one about the future of the care sector writ large, which was really, really interesting. And today we're diving into the IDD space and kind of talking about the developmental services worker and kind of what's happening in that arena and where things are headed. Kelly, I'll pass it on to you to get us started.
Sure. So I'd like to welcome our guests. We have two panelists with us today, Chad Perrin and Alana Mason. And I'll just tell you a little bit about them. So I'll start with Chad. Chad is the Executive Director for Momentum Developmental Support, a residential support program for persons with IDD. He is a licensed social worker with the NLCSW, having attained his BSW from the University of Manitoba and his clinical MSW from Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador. He has been working in the social services field for approximately 16 years in the home care, mental health, and child welfare sectors. Chad is a certified dual diagnosis specialist, specializing in the co-occurrence of IDD and mental illness via the National Association for the Dually Diagnosed. He was formerly a member of the board of directors for the Autism Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, and he currently serves as a public interest representative for the Mental Health Care and Treatment Review Board for the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. So Chad, welcome to the panel. And we also have Alana joining us. So Alana has worked with Gateway Homes for 31 years, over 20 years as a supervisor of the small option home, as well as 12 years teaching crisis management as a MANT instructor. Most recently, she has taken a position at Gateway Homes as HR, head trainer and recruitment. And in her spare time, she is head coach of Special Olympics swimming in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia with 31 athletes, as well as the head coach for the provincial swim team representing Nova Scotia at the 2014 BC Summer National Games and the 2018 Nova Scotia Summer National Games. So Alana, welcome to the panel. And thank you both for joining us today. So we'll just get started by hearing a bit from our panelists about their organizations. So Alana, how about we start with you? Can you tell us a bit about where your organization operates, your values, and how many clients you have? And briefly, can you also tell us about one thing that you're always thinking about when it comes to the workers providing care?
Thank you for having me. So Gateway Homes Incorporated is based out of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. We have 6 small option homes. Our main office is located in Dartmouth, as well as 5 of our homes, and we have 1 home across the bridge in Bedford. We are currently supporting 14 homeowners, all with varying needs and personalities. I guess if I was thinking about Gateway as a whole and what our values are, we really value ownership and equity. One of the reasons Gateway was set up the way it was is we wanted the people that we support to own something. And so our organization is set up so that our homeowners own the shares in the company. So we work for them. They're our bosses, and thus they own their own homes. Providing them with equity so that if they need things, you know, something happens and they're their needs change, we can provide that for them. We're also a real relationship-based organization, and that's reflected in the fact that we are a small agency with just a small number of homeowners and houses. We hire specifically for our homeowners. So when you get hired, you're being hired to work in that home specifically with those homeowners, because we feel that building a relationship with our homeowners is vital, so that we can hear and listen to them and understand what it is that they want and what they need and what they dream. We also see that in the training we provide for our staff. Most of the training we search out or train ourselves is relationship based. And the other thing that's really important is just social role valorization. We've always been an agency that's really pushed, getting our homeowners out in the community, establishing roles and friendships out in the community, so that people, where they work, where they volunteer, the activities they choose to do, that people see them in their community, know who they are, call them by name, invite them to participate in things. And we think that, probably is one of our more important values, that our folks are seen and that they're heard and listened to, not just by us, but by the people in their community, and they're seen as playing a valued role in their community. I think that's it. That's a little bit about us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alana. Chad, can you tell us the same kind of information about your organization, and also one thing you're always thinking about when it comes to the workers providing care?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. Momentum Developmental Support Corporation's headquarters is based out of St. John's, Newfoundland. We're a community-based service provider for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we provide residential support in what we call individualized living arrangements. I guess a lot of that would be your equivalent of small option homes, basically, in Nova Scotia. And so it's about 1 to 2 clients per home. And we also offer supportive independent living options for individuals with disabilities. We're currently operating in 7 communities within the province, and with 25 separate locations, providing care to about 30 clients. So I mean, our core values are, when we use our core values around our decision making every day of the type of care we do and how we provide our care, which are listed as integrity and quality, community, action, and fun. And we value every single one of those values in the context of, we always mean what we say and do what we mean. When it comes to integrity, we're big parts of our community. We want to make our communities to be better off than when we left them, or better off when we're a part of them. And we want to work together with our community partners to make our communities better and be a part of our communities. We're very action oriented in terms of creating outside of the box thinking, in terms of coming up with some solutions that our clients and their families and our communities need. We're very focused on quality care and making sure that the type of service we provide gives value to the lives of the people that we're providing support for. And fun, like, you don't just want to talk about the type of care that you did. You want your clients, when they're telling you about their day, about the fun that they had and the things that they did, the people that they saw, and you want them to be excited to tell you about their day. And if they're not they're excited about the fun that they had that day, well, then maybe we do a better job tomorrow, right? So and our program's mission, which is about enhancing futures of persons with disabilities, is really about our goal is not just to provide care. Our goal is to ensure that we're helping our clients have a better future for themselves in the care that we're doing. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing our job right. And the goal is to provide better support for our clients, better support for the families that are part of their world, and better support for our communities, and creating that better future that we can see happening. So when it comes to the workers providing care, I mean, we're constantly discussing, how do you set them up for success? And that discussion is really wide ranging in terms of what goes into helping a frontline developmental service worker have success with their clients, right? So I mean, you're talking about everything from environmental management to situational management guidelines, the kinds of training that are available to educate the frontline workers on what they need to know to support their clients, staffing ratios, support from their clients, how involved in the decision making are the workers being with the clients in terms of allowing the clients to have decision making over their own day, and in the event that the clients don't have that cognitive ability, then family members or the peer network that form the individual sphere, like how do we do joint decision making and involving them in the course of their care. There's a lot of conversations that go into setting them up for success, but at the end of the day, for us, the goal is to set the staff up for success so that they have the same mentality in working with their clients, that if we're setting them up for success, they're setting the clients up for success. And we're all focused on the outcome of a great day for the clients that we're working with and a better overall life because we're involved together.
Thanks, Chad and Alana. I love your answers and the way you talk about your organizations. You know, I wrote down a couple key things that I kept hearing is this work is really relational. It's about relationships. It has to be people-centered, and it's certainly about the clients, but it's about community building in terms of their participation, their leadership, and the kind of that self-fulfillment as they think about what's possible for them in their lives. So let's dive into the questions a little bit. I'm just going to read out some of the kind of broader context that we wanted to have this conversation in, and then share the couple of themes that we want to cover in our conversation today. So, you know, supportive services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that's a changing landscape. There's enhanced levels of demand. There's certainly evolving cultural attitudes. There's a wider range of needs, but also a growing understanding of diagnoses and kind of how we identify them, how we support that. Also a growing understanding of abilities and challenges. And I think that's requiring that many of us think a bit more ambitiously about the models of service, about self-determination, about frameworks of impact. At the center of that, as you both mentioned, is both the clients and the workers. So the themes we'd like to cover today with kind of that changing landscape in mind is specifically how are the needs changing and how do we think about community inclusion? That's one theme. We want to really talk about the workers, so DSW being a changing profession. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'd love to hear some forward-looking thoughts. Like if you guys stretch your imagination into the future, where do you think this work is headed? So let's start with that first one, changing needs and community inclusion. So when you think about your clients and your organization and the sector that you're in, what are the kind of the emerging areas of support? You know, are you seeing greater and greater needs for clinical-based interventions? Is there more demand for services that drive clients towards independence and self-determination? Just would love to hear your reflection on how you've seen that change or kind of what's happening right now. And as you're answering, you know, what's driving those changes? You know, there's something behind those changes. What are those driving forces? And Chad, do you want to kick it off with that, and then we'll go to Alana? And I should say about 4.5 minutes each for this one.
Aeon's putting that time limit on for me, Alana, just so that you know that. But absolutely, thank you very much. Here in Newfoundland and Labrador, one of the things that kind of goes into our community needs and our changing needs is we're decades behind the rest of Canada in terms of the services that are available. Options that exist, even in neighboring maritime provinces like Nova Scotia, PEI, and Brunswick, we don't even have some of the options that are available there. They just haven't been developed here yet in the course of the deinstitutionalization movement and getting clients out of hospitals in the 60s and 70s. They just never really were developed really to a great detail. So what it means is families and individuals are struggling to maintain their community placements. It's resulting in clients presenting acute care in hospitals more often with nowhere else to go because there isn't really a centralized place for the clients to go when things are breaking down. They don't know how to provide support, or family members don't know how to provide support. There's any number of reasons why that happens. I mean, there's parents of a person with a disability could become medically infirm and end up being admitted or go to long-term care, or worst case scenario, perhaps their loved one passes away. and they don't have another family member who can provide support or aren't willing to provide support for them. That's becoming an increasing theme. Maybe the individual begins to present with a mental illness and the family don't understand how they're supposed to provide support to the person or get them the support that they need for treatment. Or maybe if the individual's relatively independent, they start to experience symptoms and they don't know what to ask for and how to communicate what they need to their medical team and how to manage their own illness. It's also a lack of clinical supports, I think. I mean, there's not a lot of options for life skill building or clinical supports here on the island. So you can see that clients will get screened out of counseling services here in Newfoundland and Labrador because of, even if they're relatively mild in terms of functioning, they'll say that they can't do the intrinsic internal piece that you would do in counseling. So you take all these things and you have an aging population here in Newfoundland and Labrador, which is also a trend in Canada. But it's really in Newfoundland and Labrador, we seem to be leading the pack in terms of how quickly our population is aging for the rest of the country. And then you start to see some of the breakdown in terms of needs that are happening for clients. There just isn't a lot of ability to handle that. So COVID-19 seems to have shone a bright shining light on some of the limitations that were already present in the healthcare system. I think to use an analogy to kind of explain what I mean, I think in healthcare we've been treading water for so long, our legs were already tired. But the flotation devices we were using to keep ourselves afloat longer have started to deflate, and now it's even that much harder just to keep our head above water. So momentum has been really focused on how do we build the resources we need in our community. A proposal we've called creating capacity, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We really just wanted to look at what the rest of the Maritimes and the rest of Canada are offering in terms of services. So it's about an array of community-based supports intended to support persons with disabilities for things like emergency placement, so that you aren't taking up a bed in a hospital or in a mental health floor. There's a home you can go to with support staff if it's a community placement breakdown. More supportive independent living options, creating some community clinical supports to ensure that if you have a history of trauma, which unfortunately happens a lot with our clientele, with persons with disabilities, you have the ability to have someone who can help you navigate those feelings of the impact of your trauma. We want to create the care modalities necessary to move the population forward. I mean, the limitations to it are really just a matter of, like everything in a single funder payer system, it's political will, it's funding, and you ultimately at the end of the day need people to work in the service, which is a problem. Like staffing and recruitment is a problem for many different types of providers all across the country. I mean, that's a topic for a whole other conversation, but I think it's really about understanding the needs of our communities and being willing to really explore what are we seeing in our communities and how do we build what we need in our communities. And I think it's really what it's about for us.
Thanks for that, Chad. Yeah, a lot of complexities driving some of that change and struggle in the sector right now. Lana, what are you saying? What's on your mind with changing needs and community?
Well, it's interesting. I was writing some notes down when Chad was speaking, saying, "Yep, we've got that. Yep, that we're dealing with that." So I echo a lot. It's good to hear that we have more services. Sometimes I don't know where they are. So same kind of things, parents aging, lots of people in hospitals, lots of people being supported in long-term care facilities like nursing homes and things like that. I think there's a real lack of understanding for parents who have a child with a disability about what the process is, how to access services, that they can even get services when they're supporting their child at home. I hear it every day at swimming. Parents come to me and say, "Hey, can my child stay overnight at the small option you run so they can see what it's like?" Well, that's not how it works, right? They don't know they need a social worker and they got to get on a list and things like that. And the list never seems to get smaller. That list is often very long, and there's probably hundreds of people who don't even know there's a list. We're seeing more actual diagnosis of things like autism spectrum disorder and things like that without there being a lot of services out there. And even when there are services, there are differing opinions on how to support someone with ASD. Some of our folks who never had that diagnosis and, you know, have lived their life are now being diagnosed. So how do we provide the best support for them when people are so very different and need different things? COVID certainly played havoc with that. It caused not just issues in staffing, but issues in mental health for our homeowners as well as our staff. You know, we were talking the other day about how many people we've hired in the last 2 years and the fact that those staff only know COVID. So now we're saying, we really need you to get out in the community and establish those relationships. And they're like, what? You know, because that's not what we've been doing for 2 years. And it's still a scary place to be going out and supporting our homeowners to get back into the swing of things and those things that we know will help with their mental health and stuff like that. Definitely the challenges of having access to services, professionals who deal with the issues that our folks deal with, and it's very different urban versus rural. So things that might happen here at Gateway because we're in the city, people that we might be able to support wouldn't be supported in Cape Breton because they don't have the services that we do to be able to support someone with a feeding tube and have VON come in every day, or have transportation to get to wherever. And with only a couple psychiatrists who work with our field, who are traveling, you know, one traveling all over the province, it's time, right? You could be waiting for a long time to get a referral to one of our, you know, our coast team or our quest team. So then in the meantime, you know, that person is waiting and we're trying to deal the best we can without really knowing what this person needs. I think there's also a breakdown between, we're really, really good at integration now and getting people with intellectual disabilities into the school system, but we promise them a lot and then they age out and there's nothing there for them, right? We've promised them they could have the same thing that everybody could have, but they age out at 21 and there aren't places to work. There aren't, you know, unless you go to a sheltered workshop or somewhere. So yeah, so there's a lot of the similar things, aging parents, people having to pool the resources, buy a house and have their children move in, but then it's not under the umbrella of BCS and it just causes all kinds of other issues.
Great, thanks, Alana and Chad. It's really interesting to hear about some of those challenges and your thoughts on the contributing factors to the changes that are happening. So another theme we want to focus on is the profession. So the developmental services worker is somewhat jurisdictionally specific. So in some cases, it's based on the model of home care workers, and others it's more akin to social work, and then others it's more about providing general supports. So as we move to a greater professionalization of workers in this space driven by positive outcomes for clients, what do you see as key areas of growth in terms of knowledge and competencies? And what are some challenges that you anticipate along the way? And Elena, how about you start us off with this one? Oh, I think you're still on mute there, Elena.
I was, thank you. We were just talking about that the other day because what we find often is that, especially with our competencies and with the, we have an aging population of people as well, that often the competencies that we send our staff to or that we need to have that are government driven might not quite match the people that we're supporting presently. For example, we don't have an aging competency to help people understand the changing needs of someone who ages. We don't have competency on dealing with grief because we often support people to end of life. And for a lot of people, that's the first experience they've ever had with that. And the same with palliative care and what that encompasses and stuff. So I think that there are places we are having gaps. So agencies are then left to, try to find that training themselves, pair up with another agency, because there's never really a real training budget, because you can run out of that money fairly quickly. I think also that, we didn't anticipate the fact that COVID would be putting such a strain on mental health, both for our homeowners and our staff. So now we're seeing ourselves move kind of towards providing mental health support and training in self-care and looking at mental health first aid issues, because we want to invest in our staff so they stay. And when you have a lot of long-term staff, which in our field we often do, they're burnt out by this time, and adding COVID on to that has just kind of strained it even more. And the same with getting people to work and things like that. Our teams are larger than they ever have been. And when you have 18 people on a team and you're trying to get people trained and get them into work and manage that, it can become quite unmanageable. Or those kinds of things. So the challenges going forward are just getting training that's specific to our sector, making sure that we can access training, that maybe we have to think more outside the box and work with other agencies to provide that kind of stuff, and just making sure that we have the staff to train and invest in, because that's probably the largest struggle that we have right now.
Right. Really, really good points there, Lana. Thank you. And Chad, what are you thinking in terms of the profession and growth in knowledge and competencies, as well as challenges?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll mirror again, like a lot of what Alana is saying. So like a lot of there isn't a tremendous amount of sector specific training available for our staff. And even just to extend that, we actually don't have a lot of government mandated competencies. They're very, very minimalistic here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So even the competencies for the role are very internally driven based off what we know from the business sector, from what we know from other providers in North America. And while there's the general areas of training, that the frontline workers need, which is about the specific disorders themselves, so autism and Down syndrome and intellectual disability and the rest of the array of disorders that you'll see under the umbrella, positive behavioral supports and human development. The couple of areas that we feel like we need to focus on going into the new year and going into the subsequent years is participant empowerment, building and maintaining friendships and relationships, and supporting complex presentation. Participant empowerment is mainly about, I don't know if Alana sees this in her jurisdiction, but we see a lot of, when new workers come in, they still think it's very paternalistic in the care for the clients. They think they're making decisions for the clients, and it takes a long time to train out of them. No, that's not your role. Your role is there to help the clients make their own decisions and live their own lives and set their own goals. And that's a lot of training and time and energy spent trying to focus on that participant empowerment and letting the clients have the decision-making ability in their lives. And even government structures are still very paternalistic as well. So you need to spend time working with the government partners in that way as well. Building and maintaining friendship and relationships is just what it sounds like. The common theme you'll hear from a lot of our clients that we've been trying to combat is not having a network of people. So if mom and dad are medically infirm and can't foster those connections through their friends or their community, like a lot of clients who are adults lose connection to others who aren't their frontline workers. So informal supports becomes a loss of community and not having a lot of people. And how do we support our DSWs through helping clients make those connections that are natural, and that will be not just introduce them to something and then they don't like it, they don't go back, but how do you make those connections for informal networking, and how do you get your DSWs to start thinking that way and supporting their clients through that? And the last would really be about supporting complex presentations. So You've heard me talk about supporting co-occurring mental illness or addictions issues, survivors of trauma and how that can come out in terms of symptoms and presentation, or even challenging behaviors as a result of decreased cognition. It all requires specialized training. There isn't a lot of great standardized options that are available in Canada. And even the ones you can find will often use American-based data, which really frustrates, I don't know what it's like for others, but it frustrates my frontline workers because they'll keep saying, I'm not American. But so it's about making sure that the training that you give the workers is appropriate to the communities that they're from. So if you are a Canadian employee, then the information is important based on the area that you're from. If you're American, from the information that you're from, and that the training they get reflects the community that they live within, so they understand what it's like in their community. For providers who are trying to develop these competencies and training for their workers, I mean, I agree with Alana. It's really about trying to even find the venues where you can obtain the necessary specialized skills to support the clients with IDB, because there's not a lot of it out there, but you end up having to design a lot of it yourselves and come up with it yourselves. But I think that'll be really important as we're moving forward with the frontline workers.
Right. Thanks, Chad. It's really interesting to hear about the role of training in terms of competencies as well. I know you both touched on that. So I thought now we could take some time to look forward a bit further out, say to the year 2030. By then, what is your vision of the developmental support worker? So what needs to happen between now and then to make that vision a reality? And to make it interesting, can you share one reason why someone might disagree with your vision? And how about Chad, you start us off with this one.
Great, thank you. I'm a dreamer. I like to dream big, and I'm really hopeful that by something as far out as 2030, we'll have some kind of opportunity for consistency in the role across the country. It's called many different things, as you guys have talked about in the questions. They can be called respite workers or home support workers. And really, if I could wave my magic wand and have everything the way I want, I would like, there's a classification from a North American group called the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. I would love if we could use that classification for anyone who's doing this work in this space. And to make it effective, you would need to have governments regulated for the providers who are using it under the operating standards. But they've got 15 core competencies for the work. They've got a code of ethics to align with the profession. We called our workers developmental service workers because Newfoundland and Labrador wouldn't allow us to use the term professional unless the licensing body was in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the term developmental services worker is relatively consistent in terms of what's being offered across Canada right now. And there is a program, a post-secondary program here in Newfoundland and Labrador for developmental services workers. So if I could wave my magic wand, like I say, it would have a rollout very similar to child and youth care in the early 2000s. So back in the 90s, if it was a child or youth who was in child welfare, they were largely receiving support from home support workers as well. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when they really started classifying the child and youth care worker classification and having it be implemented in various governmental programs that were providing child welfare. So now to be a child and youth care worker, you need to have completed a program on that in order to get one of those roles in a funded role. And if I could wave my magic wand, we'd have something similar across Canada to make it consistent, no matter where you went across jurisdictions. I have no idea why someone would disagree with that, but if I would say, the only real argument against that I can think of would be if you wanted, because in the Maritimes our populations aren't as large as the mainland, the alternate argument is, well, maybe you need more of a generalist approach, which is why they use classifications like home support workers or support workers, because they're intended to be generalists. That just makes it really challenging to design training plans around how do you create a competency for who's their service population. And when you have multiple types, it could be adults, it could be children, it could be a person with disability, it could be someone who's an elderly person, it could be someone who's mentally. When you have such a broad swath of needs you're addressing, it makes training and support really difficult. But that could be the only argument that I would think it would be like if you wanted to maintain a generalist approach as opposed to drilling down specifically and creating that expertise in that work. But that would be my dream by 2030 if I could make it happen.
Great, thanks, Chad. I can definitely see the rationale behind that dream or vision and providing more consistency just across the profession as a whole. Elena, what are your thoughts on the future of the role and any dreams or visions?
Well, thank you. Very similar. You know, we've seen the gaps, we've seen the gaps in training and the gaps in what's being offered. We have programs where you can take schooling to come into this field, and they don't even offer it in the city. It's only offered rurally, and we have more, you know, small or agencies and stuff in Halifax, Dartmouth, Bedford, Sackville, that, you know, we're not able to get people who come with training, come with core competencies and things like that. Definitely seeing a professional association for our staff so that they are making a living wage and seen as valued and seen as essential services and earning, you know, the money that they deserve for the work that they do and the time they put in. It's a lot different than doing an 8-hour job and going home and forgetting about it. You're invested in the people you support. They become a part of your second family, and people don't just leave that work at home. So, you know, we see a lot of staff going above and beyond and really helping our homeowners, you know, reach their dreams and the things that are important, and thinking outside the box so that people, even if they aren't going to get to do that thing, the journey to get to that place is something that is a learning, you know, and enjoyable and fun thing to do. We have designed our own kind of program. We saw that gap a few years ago. So we've, the NSRAA, which is a group of around 40 agencies in the province, created a program called RIC, and it's Respect, Integrity, Caring, and Knowledge, because we needed to go back to the old school way of doing things, the things that counted when we first started doing this work. And we're really trying to instill that. And we'd like to see that become almost like our new standard of doing things here in Nova Scotia. It really does come back to the lack of services, the lack of relevant programs like Chris was talking about, and just, you know, every agency has different labels for what their staff are and stuff. We really need something that's consistent, that people see as a professional association, and that there are standards and training that you need to have to get that designation. And the challenge with that probably is that the people making the decisions aren't the ones working in our field. They're, you know, they're the money people, and the, you know, if you want, say that our staff deserve to have this amount of money or whatever, you know, they're leaving it up to unions and things like that. So I think it's going to be a challenge. You know, we talk about person-centered funding. That was supposed to happen 10 years ago, and we're still talking about that stuff. So there's just a lot of talk about things that don't seem to kind of happen. So we kind of you have a better voice when you're a professional association, and when you can, you know, say we need training and we need to have these kinds of things to do our job. And I think anyone who would disagree with any of that probably shouldn't work in our field, for sure. But yeah, those are the kinds of challenges I think you'll see going forward, is just that, you know, money's hard to come by, and you're sharing it with X amount of places, and it's what the priorities are of the government at the time. So.
Thanks for that, guys. The 2030 is the 7.5 years. You know, we'll get there. I really appreciate what you guys are sharing, and that call for consistency and recognizing the value of the work in particular. Yeah, I think people are hearing that loud and clear, but the frustration is there, right? In smaller places with widely distributed populations, how do you invest in specialization, right? And how do you kind of bring that value forward? But there's such a clear need for it at the same time. So I do hope your visions are realized, and I think it's fantastic to have champions like you guys. Those were the kind of pre-questions we had. We did collect some along the way over the past few days. So I'm going to share a couple of those. But before I do that, you both talked about training and kind of figuring that out. And I just want to thank you both. You're both kind of early partners with Practicare, and have really helped inform, develop, and kind of structure some of that training with us as we think about the IDD space. And hopefully Practicare can be a small part of the solution of trying to get that training right, and kind of build some of that core competency consistency. But big thanks to both of your organizations for the time and leadership for helping us get that right so far. I think there's two questions that stood out to me, and you guys kind of both talked about it a little bit. The first one's probably building off of Alana, what you said about school, and it reminded me of like how important transitions are, and there's a few key transitional points. I'd love to hear about from either of you or both of you really briefly, just how does this work reach into those areas? So there's a bit of preparation or transitional work before there's really a need for services from an agency like yours, or if that's a big gap. Like, what are you seeing in that space in terms of IDD work reaching out into those transitional arenas?
Does it matter who goes first, or you want either one of us to jump in?
Go for it.
I can only speak to our experience here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and our health system and child services or children's services and education, they just don't talk very well together. And in the event you have a family or a child or an educator or a guidance counselor who's trying to help support transition into adulthood for a client, what you'll often find is that when you're trying to explain this to the health authority, they'll say, well, is that for next week? Because if it's not, then we don't have time right now. And they're very crisis driven. So while they will often complain, we didn't have enough time notice to put a transition plan in place. If you try and become proactive and talk about a transition plan, they'll say, well, we haven't got time to get into that. We're very crisis driven right now. So it's very dichotomous. There's been multiple attempts between health and our children, seniors, and social development team, even for child welfare cases who are aging out and will likely require care. There used to be a protocol that no one could ever share with us what it was. So I question whether it existed. But I just think the only way it goes smoothly is if you have a client who's able to be persistent, or a family member who's able to really just stay on top of it and make things happen. But if you aren't used to the system and you don't have a system navigator to help you get through it, it can be really challenging as a family or a person to try and make sure those transitions happen. I mean, if I were talking to a family member and they're asking me, what do I need to do? I would say you need to ride whoever you're talking to about it until you get answers and you get timelines, because otherwise it will become the end of their priority list. And you really need to put in that work to make sure things happen. But we could do it better. But that's kind of what it looks like to us here. I don't know what your experience is on it.
Yeah, it's really similar. We are definitely crisis driven. And that's the unfortunate thing, because for a lot of these folks aging out of high school and then kind of waiting to see what happens, by year 3, 4 of not being engaged and not being involved, if they don't have parents, siblings, or people or community that can help with that, then they are in crisis, because now they're developing, depression and different issues that they need to deal with. And there does seem to be a rise in people needing help that don't have siblings or family that can help when the parent is elderly, and or they themselves are elderly. Yeah, there's a real gap. I'm not sure how to fix that because here, you know, Department of Community Services and Health are very separate entities. They have different pots of money and they definitely don't like to work together. So it causes a real issue. Every year when we start swimming, I have a parents meeting, and usually that very first parents meeting is parents asking me about the system. How does it work? How do I get a social worker? What do you mean there's a list? You know, how do I prepare to care for this you know, my daughter or my son? You know, this is very overwhelming. Who do I talk to? Is there, you know, all of those kinds of answers, right? And they think because I work for a service provider that I can do all those things for them. So it's really, I'm not a parent of a child with a disability myself, but I can imagine that stress that causes, because again, in school being integrated, I can have everything that everyone else has because it's my right, but it's really not there. You know, there's really not places to work. Could I work in the community? Sure, if I have support. We're seeing a real decline here in Nova Scotia of employers hiring people with intellectual disabilities as well. And so that's a problem because you need employers who are willing to invest the time to take on, you know, people. And we stress, I've often acted as references and stuff for some of my athletes. And I mean, these are the best workers. They don't call in sick. They show up. They want to work. They want to be part of the team. They want to contribute. They're the best workers, right, to hire. So it's a real dilemma. Because again, just like you were saying, Chris, nobody talks. We don't talk about those gaps. We talk about them in our sector at our conferences and things like that. But when it comes to talking to the people who could make the difference, they don't work together to help us solve the problems.
I think we've been hearing a lot about that in healthcare writ large, and certainly in the last conversation when we were talking about community care, you know, that systems level view and kind of building the right linkages for better coordination. It just keeps coming up over and over again. So I'm absolutely hearing you on that. And it's unfortunate. There's so many gaps that are created just through lack of missing coordination, right? That don't really need to be there. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about goes back to the professionalization of the DSW. And you guys mentioned, you know, there's more and more dual diagnosis or new diagnosis later in life. And some of it is mental health. Some of it is, you know, could be things like ASD. Do you think, you know, looking ahead, DSWs will need to be more clinically trained, or do you see a stronger augmentation of DSWs with kind of clinical supports working alongside them?
Ladies first, Simona.
You're still on mute, Alana.
That mute button gets me every time. No, I don't think I see the DSW needing to be clinically trained. There's things with that worry me too. You know, obviously, if I have that kind of background and I'm working in the field, I might be in my own mind diagnosing people and trying to solve things, but it really isn't my place to do that. Definitely, the more knowledge we have and the more a team can come with different ideas and different backgrounds, sure, but it's like if I came with a counseling degree and someone disclosed to me, it's really not my role to counsel them. I would find someone, you know, outside to do that. I think it certainly gives insight, but it can be a double-edged sword where it can also divide teams when people are coming in and doing those kinds of things. I definitely think, though, clinical aside, we definitely need more schools and programs and things. The problem with that is that it's so easy to get hired into our field without being in a program that people will often, the program goes aside because they feel the on-the-job training and the learning they get in the agency is more valuable than going into a school system with a program and stuff like that. So yeah, so we've had programs that were supposed to start and didn't because people are, going and getting hired and getting their on-job training as they go within, within the agency they work, and especially where we have so many rural agencies and people with, they're not, there's a real need in their community for the workers, so they're not going, somewhere else for schooling and stuff. They're staying in their community and learning, from the folks who are our best teachers, and then accessing outside support for those needs. So.
Yeah, I'll agree with Alana. I have a colleague who's a psychologist, and he tells me every year he gets his new clinical psychology students, and they're learning to read the DSM, which is a book you use to differentiate what's a mental disorder. And they'll start reading through the book. Oh my gosh, I meet those criteria. Oh my gosh, I meet those criteria. And they'll diagnose themselves with 20 things. And every time he'll have to tell them, guys, listen, there's a process. It's a differential. That's not how this works, right? So education is great, but they teach the same thing in mental health first aid to people in the general public. Just because we're explaining to you some of the symptoms for depression, don't go jumping to conclusions and diagnosing everyone you know with those disorders. So training's always, like Alana was saying, it's a double-edged sword. You want to make sure you're getting the right level of training to the people at the right time. In training development, we always talk about what are the generalist things that every developmental services worker needs to know. And then when you get into really complex care for specific individuals, it often isn't beneficial unless you can put the training in the context of the individual. So we'll often then bring in some of our partners to talk about how this complex presentation, what it looks like with this individual. There's a lot of literature on how clinical presentations are just different in IDD versus the general population. There's a lot of literature from an organization called NADD about that. And I've never seen two cases of persons with intellectual disabilities be exactly the same in my career. They're very, very different. And I think one of the challenges in training development is in understanding there's a baseline of training that everyone needs to have on a broad swath of things, but you still need to allow for the individualistic pieces of training that need to be incorporated into a training plan for a particular client.
Nothing is super simple. I love the nuance of that answer, and you're right. It is a double-edged sword. How do you provide the right level of training? How do you respect the differentiation of the specialties? And when do you bring in that advanced training or that additional support? And really taking that team-based approach that keeps support and the person at the center rather than a clinical view at the center of what's happening. We're just about at time, folks. Before we wrap things up, any kind of lingering thoughts, notes you had, anything you want to throw out there before we close up?
Don't have time for all my soapbox moments. No, I think, ultimately, we're in a sector, in a profession that our staff aren't seen as essential workers here in Nova Scotia, and I can't speak to the rest of the country, but I just think that, our staff do a good job. We invest in them, and they stay, and they stay through the good times and the bad times. And I just think that we need to see some real changes in this sector, in professional designation, the training for folks, just the movement to transitioning people from, whether it's from high school into adulthood or from home to living on your own, whatever it is. Just need to obviously work on finding better avenues and better supports and stuff, but it does come down a lot to staffing and the people that do the work and who listen to our folks and help their dreams happen and stuff. And if we invest them as agencies and organizations, but if our governing bodies and the provinces and the government can't see their value, then it really is difficult for them to hear it from us and believe it. You know, I value you. I value your input. I value, you know, that you're here every day. I value that you're showing up. So we need more people to value that. And it's not, I mean, I realize it's not just our sector. Every sector is struggling with different things, but I mean, I've been in this field a long time and it's never changed. People have felt undervalued working in this field, and they get a lot of value from our folks. I mean, they tell us in every way they can how much they value us and stuff, but it would be nice to see government and the people who can make that difference for a lot of our staff do that as well. That's my soapbox moment for today.
Well, I'm just going to mirror again a lot of what Alana has said. I really think knowing that the aging population that we have coming in the next few years in Canada, the DSW role is going to become increasingly more crucial to community and health service provision. They deserve the light shone on them for the hard work that they do. They are exceptionally critical to the care that is required. And I think the best way to get there is by raising, Alana makes a good point about raising the overall public discourse about persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities and trying to get anyone involved. So maybe it's not as a DSW, maybe it's, we want to try and encourage people who want to be DSWs to join us. But maybe it's in other ways. Maybe it's in volunteering in Special Olympics. Maybe it's in a business partnering with an organization to do something different that meets the needs of their community. And I think it's raising a general level of awareness in our communities. And the more aware the communities are of the needs and the importance of it, the more I think people will see what our staff already know about the value in doing this work. Like, it's challenging, sure, like a lot of careers, but it's so rewarding. And you don't know it until you're in it. I think the more we raise awareness of the good work that our DSWs are doing and the impact they have on their communities and making their communities a better place, I think you'll get more people who will find a better overall value in their life to be a part of it.
You guys are wicked. This whole thing was awesome. I'm so glad you guys are both available and agreed to be panelists today. Thank you so much, Alana and Chad.
Thank you.
This was fantastic. We did record today, so we will get this up in a couple of weeks and maybe share some of the key nuggets that you guys had to share. And thanks to my two colleagues as well, Chris and Kelly, for helping make today happen and for co-hosting. That's it, everybody. If you're one of the attendees, we're going to close down the webinar now. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks
Have
for
a
having
great
us.
day. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys.